A Wish Beneath the Moon, Part 1. The autumn wind carried whispers of change through the corridors of Ashmont Hall, though none among the assembled guests could yet perceive the transformation that would unfold beneath its ancient roof. The estate, with its weathered stone walls and ivy-clad towers, had witnessed countless seasons of human drama, yet the events of this particular October would etch themselves into its history with singular permanence. Duke Magnus Ashford arrived at his family's ancestral property with the weariness of a man who had spent too many years fulfilling obligations rather than pursuing desires. At 32, he had cultivated a reputation for cool pragmatism that served him well in Parliament and business ventures, but left his personal life remarkably barren. His peers whispered that he possessed a heart of marble, incapable of the passionate attachments that drove other men to recklessness or poetry. They were wrong, though Magnus himself had almost come to believe their assessments. The gathering at Ashmont Hall represented yet another tedious social obligation, this time hosted by his aunt, the formidable Dowager Countess of Pemberton. She had assembled what she deemed an appropriate selection of eligible young ladies, each vetted for breeding, accomplishment, and fortune. Magnus knew the ritual well: stilted conversations over tea, carefully chaperoned walks through manicured gardens, and the suffocating pressure of expectation that accompanied every interaction. His aunt meant well, but her matchmaking efforts had become increasingly desperate as the years passed, without him showing interest in any prospective bride. What the Dowager Countess did not know was that her nephew had long ago resigned himself to a marriage of convenience when the time inevitably came. Love, he believed, was a luxury afforded to poets and fools, not to men burdened with ducal responsibilities and extensive estates. He would choose a suitable wife when practicality demanded it, someone who understood the transactional nature of aristocratic marriage and would not trouble him with romantic expectations he could never fulfill. The first evening passed precisely as Magnus had anticipated, tedious and interminable. He endured introductions to young ladies who simpered and blushed, their mothers hovering nearby with predatory awareness. Miss Charlotte Weatherby played the pianoforte with technical precision, but no soul. Lady Beatrice Thornton recited French poetry she clearly did not understand. The Honourable Miss Sutherland discussed her watercolours with exhausting enthusiasm. Each interaction reinforced Magnus's conviction that his future marriage would be a matter of selecting the least objectionable option from a field of uniformly uninspiring candidates. By the time dinner concluded and the ladies withdrew, Magnus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came from suppressing his true thoughts behind a mask of polite interest. He declined the port and cigars his male peers enjoyed, instead seeking solitude in the estate's extensive grounds. The moon hung full and luminous above the tree line, casting silver shadows across the lawns he had roamed as a boy. Walking had always provided him clarity, and tonight he needed to escape the stifling atmosphere of expectation that permeated every room of the manor. His feet carried him along familiar paths, past the rose garden where his mother had once spent summer afternoons, beyond the ornamental lake that reflected moonlight like scattered diamonds. He moved without conscious destination, allowing his mind to drift as his body navigated terrain remembered from childhood explorations. The night air held the sharp clarity of impending winter, and he breathed deeply, grateful for this brief respite from the performance aristocratic life demanded. It was pure chance that led him beneath the east wing windows, where guest chambers overlooked the herb garden his aunt maintained with meticulous care. Pure chance, or perhaps something more ineffable that orchestrates the pivotal moments of human existence. Later, Magnus would wonder if fate itself had guided his steps to that precise location at that particular moment, positioning him to overhear words that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of his life. The voice reached him softly at first, barely audible above the rustling of leaves. He paused, uncertain whether he had truly heard anything or merely imagined sounds in the darkness. Then it came again, clearer now, a woman speaking, though not to any visible companion. The quality of that voice struck him immediately. It lacked the affected refinement so many ladies cultivated, the practiced modulation that rendered every utterance a performance. This voice carried authenticity, speaking words that came from the heart rather than from a rehearsed script of social propriety. Magnos knew he should continue walking, that remaining to listen would constitute a breach of privacy and honor. Yet something in the tone of that voice rooted him in place, compelling him to attend to words not meant for his ears, but which somehow felt directed toward the deepest chambers of his guarded heart. "I know this is foolish," the voice said, addressing the moon that hung above the garden like a celestial witness, "speaking my wishes to the night sky as though you might answer. But I have no one else to tell, no confidant who would understand without judging or trying to convince me. My hopes are childish fantasies." Magnos remained motionless, barely breathing, acutely aware that he was transgressing but unable to walk away. The woman's words held a vulnerability that pierced through the armor of cynicism he had spent years constructing. "I do not ask for much," she continued, and Magnos detected the tremor of genuine emotion beneath her steady tone. "I do not need grand estates or impressive titles. I care nothing for jewels or social position. These things that others prize so highly mean less than nothing to me." A pause followed, during which Magnos found himself leaning forward, unconsciously eager to hear what desire this unknown woman would confess to the indifferent moon. "All I wish," she said finally, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "is that when I marry, it will be to a man who truly loves me. Not my dowry, not my family connections, not the convenience I might represent. I want to be chosen because the man who chooses me cannot imagine his life without me in it. I want to be loved, genuinely, completely, without reservation or pretense." The simplicity of her request struck Magnos with unexpected force. In a world where marriages were negotiated like business contracts, where affection was considered a pleasant bonus rather than a foundation, this woman dared to desire something profoundly radical: authentic love as the basis for lifelong commitment. "Is that too much to ask?" she whispered to the moon. "Is it foolish to believe that somewhere exists a man who might look at me and see not just a suitable wife, but the person he cannot live without? I do not want to be tolerated or endured. I do not want politeness masquerading as affection. I want to matter to someone. I want to be loved for who I am, not what I represent." Her voice broke slightly on those final words, revealing depths of loneliness that Magnos recognized because he carried similar depths within himself. For years he had convinced himself that emotional distance served as protection, that allowing no one close meant avoiding the pain of disappointment or betrayal. But hearing this woman's heartfelt wish, he suddenly understood what his careful isolation had cost him. "I will wait as long as necessary," she said, her voice strengthening with determination. "I will refuse every proposal that comes from duty rather than devotion. I would rather remain unmarried my entire life than settle for a union devoid of genuine feeling. Let others think me foolish or romantic or impossibly idealistic. I know what I want, and I will not compromise on something so fundamental to my happiness." Silence followed, broken only by the distant call of a nightbird and the whisper of wind through the garden herbs. Magnos waited, uncertain if she might say more, but the window above remained dark and quiet. After several minutes he heard the faint sound of the window closing, followed by footsteps withdrawing into the depths of the chamber. He stood alone in the moonlit garden, his mind reeling from what he had witnessed. He did not know this woman's identity, had not glimpsed her face, yet her words had burrowed into his consciousness with remarkable tenacity. More than that, they had awakened something he thought long dormant, a capacity for feeling that transcended calculation and convenience. The carefully constructed philosophy that had governed his adult life suddenly seemed hollow and insufficient. He had convinced himself that pragmatic detachment represented maturity and wisdom. But what if he had simply been protecting himself from vulnerability? What if his vaunted rationality was merely sophisticated cowardice, a refusal to risk the emotional exposure that genuine connection required? This unknown woman possessed a courage he lacked. She dared to articulate desires that society deemed inappropriate for women of her station, refusing to accept the loveless marriages that claimed so many of her peers. She insisted on being valued for her essential self, rather than her utility within the social machinery of aristocratic life. And in doing so, she had inadvertently challenged everything Magnos believed about himself, and the limitations he had accepted as inevitable. He remained in the garden long after she had withdrawn, wrestling with unfamiliar emotions and unexpected possibilities. Something fundamental had shifted within him during those few minutes of inadvertent eavesdropping. He could not return to the man he had been before hearing her whispered confession to the moon. That version of himself, cold, pragmatic, emotionally remote, now seemed like a partial existence, a life lived in shadow rather than sunlight. When he finally returned to the manor, moving quietly through corridors lit by scattered candles, Magnus felt both exhilarated and terrified by the transformation beginning within him. He did not yet know this woman's identity, but he knew with absolute certainty that he needed to find her. More than that, he needed to become the man she had described in her moonlit prayer, someone capable of offering the authentic love she deserved. The following morning arrived with deceptive ordinariness. Magnus descended to breakfast, expecting the usual assembly of guests engaging in predictable conversation over eggs and toast. His aunt presided at the head of the table, orchestrating interactions with the subtle manipulation she had perfected over decades of social maneuvering. The same young ladies from the previous evening occupied their assigned places, their morning appearances carefully arranged to suggest effortless beauty. Magnus surveyed the gathering with new attention, wondering which of these women had spoken to the moon with such vulnerable honesty. Miss Weatherby maintained her usual expression of calculated pleasantness. Lady Beatrice conversed with theatrical animation about the previous evening's entertainment. Miss Sutherland discussed plans for a sketching expedition with forced enthusiasm. None displayed the emotional depth he had witnessed in the garden, though he recognized that society trained women to conceal their authentic selves behind acceptable facades. His aunt interrupted his observations with characteristic directness. "Magnus, you disappeared early last evening. I hope you found the gathering agreeable." "Quite agreeable, Aunt," he replied with practiced neutrality, though his thoughts churned with questions he could not voice. "Excellent. Today I have arranged for the young ladies to display their various accomplishments. We shall gather in the music room after breakfast for performances." She delivered this announcement with satisfaction, clearly pleased with her organizational prowess. Magnus suppressed a sigh, recognizing another tedious ritual designed to showcase marriageable qualities. Yet today, unlike previous such occasions, he found himself genuinely curious. Perhaps the woman who had spoken to the moon would reveal herself through some subtle indication visible only to him now that he knew what to seek. The music room filled quickly after breakfast, guests arranging themselves on chairs and settees, positioned to provide optimal viewing of the performers. Magnus claimed a seat offering clear sight lines to all the young ladies, determined to observe carefully for any sign of the vulnerability he had heard expressed in darkness. Miss Weatherby performed first, executing a complex sonata with mechanical precision that impressed without moving. Her fingers struck each note correctly, her posture remained impeccable throughout, but the music held no soul, no emotional truth. Magnus watched her face as she played, noting the concentration that suggested technical mastery without genuine passion. This was not the woman who had confessed her deepest desires to the indifferent moon. Lady Beatrice followed with a dramatic recitation, her voice rising and falling with studied emotion as she declaimed verses about unrequited love. The performance felt calculated rather than authentic, designed to showcase her accomplishments rather than express genuine feeling. She glanced frequently at her audience, clearly aware of the impression she made and adjusting her delivery accordingly. Magnus dismissed her from consideration almost immediately. Several other young ladies performed in succession, songs, poetry, even a brief scene from a popular play. Each displayed competence and training, but none revealed the emotional authenticity he sought. Magnus began to wonder if he had somehow misjudged the previous night, if his impression of profound honesty had been merely projection or wishful thinking. Then his aunt announced the final performer, and Magnus's attention sharpened with renewed focus. "Miss Evangeline Pemberton will favor us with a selection on the harp," the Dowager Countess declared, gesturing toward a young woman who had remained quietly seated throughout the previous performances. Magnus straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. He had not noticed this particular guest during the previous evening's introductions, or perhaps he simply had not paid sufficient attention amid the parade of eligible ladies his aunt thrust before him. Now, watching her rise and move toward the harp positioned by the window, he studied her with intense concentration. Evangeline Pemberton possessed no remarkable beauty by conventional standards. Her features were pleasant but not striking, her figure adequate but not exceptional, her coloring ordinary brown hair and hazel eyes that suggested no particular distinction. Yet something in the way she carried herself captured Magnos's attention, a quiet dignity that seemed born from internal strength rather than social training. She settled before the harp with practiced ease, her hands finding position on the strings with familiar confidence. Then, instead of launching immediately into performance, she paused and gazed through the window at the garden beyond. Her expression in that unguarded moment revealed a depth of feeling that the other performers had lacked, a quality of contemplative sadness that suggested wells of emotion carefully concealed from casual observation. When she began to play, Magnos felt his heart constrict with recognition. The music that flowed from beneath her fingers carried the same authentic emotion he had heard in her voice the previous night. She played not to impress but to express, allowing the melody to convey feelings words could not capture. The piece spoke of longing and hope, of loneliness endured with courage, of dreams held privately in the darkness. He knew, even before she finished playing, that he had found her. This quiet, unassuming young woman who had not caught his attention during formal introductions was the same person who had whispered her heart's desire to the moon. The realization struck him with the force of revelation, accompanied by a surge of emotion he could neither name nor resist. As the final notes faded into silence, Evangeline raised her eyes and briefly met Magnos's gaze. In that instant of connection, something passed between them, acknowledgement perhaps, or recognition of possibility. Then she looked away, rising from the harp with quiet grace and returning to her seat amid polite applause. Magnos barely heard the compliments his aunt bestowed upon the performance or the conversations that resumed around him. His entire being focused on the young woman who had unknowingly altered his understanding of what life might hold. He did not yet love her. Love required knowledge and time that they had not shared, but he felt drawn toward her with a certainty that transcended logic or calculation. She had asked the moon for someone who would love her authentically, who would choose her for herself, rather than convenience or obligation. Magnos could not yet offer her such love, but he could offer something equally valuable, his commitment to pursuing it, his determination to become the man worthy of her heart. The morning's entertainments concluded with an invitation to walk the grounds before luncheon. Magnos maneuvered himself to Evangeline's vicinity, though propriety demanded he maintain appropriate distance and avoid any appearance of particular attention. She walked with two other young ladies, conversing quietly about the autumn foliage, while Magnos followed several paces behind with a group of gentlemen guests. He observed her throughout that walk, noting details he had missed during the morning's performance. She moved with natural grace that required no artificial enhancement. When she smiled at something her companion said, genuine warmth transformed her ordinary features into something approaching beauty. Most tellingly, she seemed utterly unconscious of his observation, neither preening for his attention nor affecting indifference to provoke pursuit. During luncheon, Magnos positioned himself where he could watch her without obvious scrutiny. She ate sparingly, participating in conversation when addressed, but never dominating or drawing attention to herself. The contrast between her modest demeanor and the bold honesty of her midnight confession fascinated him. She presented to the world a carefully controlled exterior that concealed profound depths of feeling, visible only to those who knew to look beyond surface presentation. His aunt noticed his unusual attentiveness, despite his efforts at discretion. She approached him later that afternoon, while the guests dispersed to rest before dinner. "I see Miss Pemberton has caught your interest," she observed with obvious satisfaction. Magnos considered denying the observation, but recognized futility in attempting to deceive his perceptive aunt. "Tell me about her," he requested instead. The Dowager Countess smiled with the triumphant expression of a matchmaker sensing success. "Evangeline is the daughter of Baron Pemberton of Somerset. The family possesses respectable lineage, though modest fortune, nothing approaching your own wealth, of course. She has been out for 3 seasons without receiving any proposals of consequence. Why? Magnus asked, genuinely curious how such a woman could remain unmarried when so many inferior candidates secured matches with ease. His aunt shrugged. She rejects every gentleman who shows interest. Her father despairs of her ever settling on anyone. Between you and me, I suspect she harbors romantic notions unsuited to practical marriage arrangements. She seems determined to hold out for some ideal that likely does not exist in the real world. Magnus felt his lips curve into the first genuine smile he had experienced in years. Perhaps that ideal exists more readily than you imagine, Aunt. Her eyes widened with hope and speculation. Magnus, are you saying— I am saying nothing yet, he interrupted gently. But I would appreciate opportunities to converse with Miss Pemberton during the remaining days of this gathering. Arrange it as discreetly as you are able. His aunt required no further encouragement. She immediately began plotting opportunities for proximity, her mind already racing through possibilities for facilitating connection between her stubborn nephew and the quietly determined young woman who had somehow captured his attention. That evening, Magnus positioned himself strategically in the drawing room after dinner, claiming a chair near where Evangeline sat with her needlework. The other guests engaged in various entertainments, card games, music, conversation, but Magnus focused exclusively on finding an opportunity to speak with her directly. His chance came when she rose to select a different thread from the basket near his location. He stood as she approached, observing proper etiquette while creating conditions for conversation. Miss Pemberton, he said quietly, keeping his voice low enough that nearby guests could not easily overhear. I found your harp performance this morning quite moving. She looked up, surprise evident in her hazel eyes. You are kind to say so, Your Grace, though I fear my skills are modest compared to others. Technical proficiency means nothing without genuine feeling, Magnus replied. You played with honesty that transcended mere competence. Colour touched her cheeks, and he glimpsed vulnerability in her expression that matched what he had heard in her voice the previous night. Music speaks truths that words sometimes cannot, she said softly. I find solace in its honesty. As do I, Magnus agreed, feeling the rightness of this connection even in its preliminary stages. Though I confess to finding honesty a rare quality in many social interactions, Evangeline met his gaze directly, and in that moment of unguarded eye contact, Magnus sensed she understood his meaning more deeply than conventional politeness would acknowledge. Perhaps we search for honesty in wrong places, she suggested carefully. Perhaps it exists only in private moments when we believe no one is listening. Her words struck him with their precision, and he wondered if she somehow knew he had overheard her confession to the moon. But no, her expression remained innocent of such knowledge, suggesting instead that she spoke from general philosophy rather than specific awareness. Private moments can reveal more truth than any public performance, Magnus agreed, allowing subtle significance to colour his tone. Before they could continue this promising exchange, his aunt appeared at Evangeline's elbow, effectively terminating their privacy. Miss Pemberton, Lady Thornton wishes to discuss your embroidery pattern. Would you mind terribly? Evangeline offered a small curtsy to Magnus and withdrew, leaving him to contemplate their brief conversation with satisfaction. She possessed intelligence to match her emotional depth, capable of engaging in substantive exchange rather than mere social pleasantries. Every moment of observation confirmed his initial impression. This woman deserved the authentic love she had requested from the moon. The days that followed established a pattern of carefully orchestrated proximity. His aunt proved remarkably adept at creating opportunities for interaction that appeared coincidental rather than arranged. Magnus found himself walking with Evangeline through the autumn gardens, their conversation ranging across topics far more substantive than weather or gossip. They discussed literature, discovering shared preferences for novels that explored human character rather than mere adventure. They debated philosophical questions about duty and desire, revealing compatible worldviews beneath different expressions. With each conversation, Magnus felt his fascination deepening into something more substantial. He began to understand not just what Evangeline wanted in a future husband, but who she was as a complete person, her quiet strength, her thoughtful intelligence, her capacity for finding beauty in ordinary moments. She possessed depths that would require a lifetime to fully explore, complexities that promised perpetual discovery rather than eventual familiarity leading to boredom. Yet Magnos remained conscious that Evangeline did not share his knowledge of her midnight confession. She conversed with him pleasantly, but showed no particular partiality, treating him with the same courteous warmth she offered all guests. He had not yet revealed his feelings or intentions, waiting for the proper moment to declare himself in a manner worthy of her dreams. That moment arrived during a morning walk through the estate's wooded paths, when circumstance and his aunt's machinations left them briefly alone amid the golden foliage of oak and maple. Magnos had rehearsed various speeches, imagining different approaches to conveying feelings that refused simple articulation. But when the opportunity presented itself, carefully prepared words fled, replaced by spontaneous honesty. "Miss Pemberton," he began, his voice carrying an intensity that made her pause and turn to face him fully. "I must tell you something that may seem presumptuous or inappropriate, yet I cannot in good conscience continue without honesty." Concern flickered across her features. "Your Grace?" "Several nights ago I walked in the garden beneath the east wing windows," he continued, deciding that complete truth represented the only foundation upon which genuine connection could build. "I overheard you speaking, not to any person, but to the moon itself." The color drained from Evangeline's face as understanding dawned. "You heard everything," Magnos confirmed gently. "Your wish for a marriage based on authentic love rather than convenience or obligation. Your determination to wait for someone who would value you for yourself rather than what you represent. Your courage in refusing to compromise on something so fundamental to your happiness." Shame and mortification flooded her expression, and she turned away, clearly wishing to flee from this humiliating exposure. "I never intended. I believed myself alone. Those were private thoughts meant for no one's ears." "I know," Magnos said, moving to where he could see her face despite her averted gaze. "I invaded your privacy inadvertently, and I apologize for that transgression, but I cannot apologize for what your words awakened within me." She looked up, confusion displacing embarrassment. "Awakened? I have spent years constructing a life of careful control and emotional distance," Magnos explained, speaking with an honesty that matched what she had offered the moon. "I convinced myself that pragmatism and logic should govern all decisions, including matters of marriage. I believed love represented a weakness or distraction unsuitable for someone with responsibilities like mine." He paused, gathering courage to continue this unprecedented confession. "Then I heard you speak about wanting to be truly chosen, genuinely loved for your essential self, and I realized that I had been settling for a partial existence, protecting myself from vulnerability by refusing to risk authentic connection." Tears gathered in Evangeline's eyes. Though whether from relief or continued embarrassment, Magnos could not immediately discern. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to offer you what you requested from the moon," Magnos said simply. "I cannot yet promise to be the man you described. I have spent too long suppressing such capacity within myself to claim instant transformation. But I can promise to pursue becoming that man with complete dedication. I can promise to court you honestly, learning who you truly are rather than who society expects you to be. And I can promise that if you grant me the opportunity, I will strive every day to offer you the authentic love you deserve." Evangeline stared at him with an expression that cycled through disbelief, hope, and cautious wonder. "You cannot mean... We barely know each other, Your Grace." "Which is precisely why I propose courtship rather than immediate proposal," Magnos replied. "I want time to earn your trust and affection genuinely. I want you to know me as I actually am, not as my title or position suggests I should be. I want us to build something real together, something worthy of the courage you displayed in naming your true desires." Silence stretched between them, filled with birdsong and rustling leaves, while Evangeline processed his unexpected declaration. Magnos waited without pressing, understanding that she required time to reconcile this reality with expectations she had likely abandoned regarding him. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling but determined. "And if I cannot love you? If time reveals we are unsuited despite good intentions? Then we will part as friends, and I will wish you well in finding the love you seek elsewhere," Magnus promised. "I offer you courtship, Evangeline, not obligation. You remain free to accept or reject as your heart guides you." Using her given name felt simultaneously too intimate and absolutely necessary, a small transgression of formality that acknowledged the unusual foundation of their potential relationship. Evangeline noticed immediately, her eyes widening slightly before a tentative smile touched her lips. "You offer something I feared impossible," she said softly, "a chance for genuine feeling to develop naturally, rather than being forced into convenient arrangements. How could I refuse such a gift?" Relief flooded through Magnus, followed immediately by excitement, and no small amount of trepidation. He had committed himself to an entirely new approach to human connection, abandoning the comfortable detachment that had protected him for so long. Yet watching the hope illuminate Evangeline's face, he knew with absolute certainty that this risk represented his only path toward a life truly lived rather than merely endured. They walked together back toward the manor, maintaining appropriate distance, while everything between them had fundamentally shifted. The remaining days of the house party acquired new significance as they began the delicate work of learning each other beyond social masks. Magnus discovered that Evangeline possessed a quiet wit that emerged once she felt comfortable enough to share it, along with a thoughtful wisdom about human nature that came from careful observation rather than formal education. She, in turn, began to perceive depths in him that his cool exterior had concealed. Vulnerability carefully hidden, kindness expressed through practical action rather than effusive sentiment, and a capacity for intense focus that extended beyond business matters into genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. When the house party concluded and guests prepared to depart, Magnus secured Baron Pemberton's permission to formally court his daughter. The Baron, surprised but pleased by such distinguished attention toward Evangeline, readily consented. And so began a courtship unlike any in recent aristocratic memory, one built on honest communication, patient understanding, and the shared determination to create something authentic in a world that often settled for convenient pretense. Winter descended upon England with unusual severity that year, transforming the countryside into a landscape of stark beauty where bare trees stood like dark sentinels against snow-covered fields. Yet despite the cold that kept many safely ensconced before roaring fires, Magnus found himself travelling frequently between London and Somerset, drawn inexorably toward the modest estate where Evangeline resided with her family. Their courtship progressed with deliberate care, neither rushing toward premature conclusions nor allowing momentum to dissipate through excessive caution. Magnus had entered this endeavour determined to court Evangeline properly, and proper courtship required time, attention, and the willingness to reveal oneself gradually rather than all at once. He wrote letters that arrived with reliable frequency, correspondence that eschewed the flowery rhetoric typical of romantic declarations in favour of substantive thoughts about books read, observations about current events, and increasingly personal reflections on his internal evolution. Evangeline responded with equal thoughtfulness, her letters revealing the keen intelligence and gentle humour that first conversations had only hinted at. She wrote about her daily life without embellishment or false modesty, walks through winter gardens, time spent reading by firelight, conversations with her younger sister about dreams and possibilities. Through these exchanges, Magnus came to understand not just who Evangeline was, but how she perceived the world around her, what brought her joy, what troubled her conscience, what hopes she harboured for a future that remained uncertain despite his declared intentions. His visits to Somerset became the highlight of each month, carefully planned excursions that allowed them supervised time together within the bounds of propriety. Baron Pemberton proved an affable, if somewhat bemused, chaperone, clearly uncertain what to make of a duke, who showed such persistent interest in his practical, unassuming daughter. Lady Pemberton, Evangeline's stepmother, hovered with the anxious vigilance of a woman who feared any misstep might shatter this unexpected opportunity. "She worries I will say something wrong and drive you away," Evangeline confided during one of their chaperoned walks through the estate's winter garden, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. As though you are so easily frightened by honest conversation. Magnus smiled, appreciating her awareness of the absurdity. I suspect I am more likely to be driven away by excessive perfection than by authentic humanity. I caught you precisely because you refused to perform elaborate deceptions about who you are. Many would call that a fault rather than a virtue, Evangeline observed, pausing to examine icicles hanging from a bare rose arbor. My stepmother certainly believes my honesty has cost me numerous advantageous matches. Then those men sought something you could never have genuinely provided, Magnus replied. And you were right to refuse them. She turned to face him, her expression serious in the pale winter sunlight. How can you be certain? How do you know that I am not simply too particular, too demanding in my expectations? The vulnerability beneath her question touched him deeply. Despite her courage in naming her desires to the moon, Evangeline clearly harbored doubts about whether such wishes represented reasonable hopes or foolish fantasies. The world had likely told her often enough that she expected too much, that she should be grateful for any respectable offer rather than holding out for emotional connection. Because settling for less than genuine feeling would have made you perpetually miserable, Magnus said with quiet conviction. Because you deserve a partnership built on mutual regard rather than mere convenience. And because I have seen enough loveless marriages among my peers to know that wealth and status provide cold comfort when shared with someone who views you as an obligation rather than a joy. Tears gathered in Evangeline's eyes, though she blinked them away with characteristic determination not to make scenes. You speak as though you truly understand. I am learning to, Magnus admitted. You are teaching me to value what I once dismissed as sentimental weakness. You are showing me that emotional honesty represents strength rather than vulnerability. They walked in companionable silence for several minutes, the crunch of snow beneath their boots providing rhythm to unspoken thoughts. Baron Pemberton followed at a discreet distance, allowing them the illusion of privacy while fulfilling propriety's demands. Magnus found himself grateful for these quiet moments, these opportunities to simply exist in Evangeline's presence without the pressure of performing or impressing. As weeks became months and winter grudgingly yielded to early spring, Magnus noticed shifts within himself that would have seemed impossible merely a year earlier. He who had prided himself on rational detachment found himself composing letters late into the night, trying to capture in words the exact quality of his growing feelings. He who had avoided emotional entanglements discovered that he thought of Evangeline constantly, wondering what she might be doing, imagining conversations they had not yet had, planning surprises that might bring joy to her thoughtful face. His friends noticed the transformation with varying degrees of amusement and concern. Lord Hartwick, his oldest companion from university days, observed during a chance meeting at his club, "You have become alarmingly human, Magnus. Should I be worried?" "Only if you consider happiness a concerning condition," Magnus replied mildly, refusing to rise to the gentle mockery. "Happiness?" Hartwick repeated with exaggerated shock. "Good God, man! Next you will be writing poetry and sighing at sunsets." "I already sigh at sunsets," Magnus confessed with uncharacteristic candor. Though primarily because they mean another day has passed without seeing Evangeline, Hartwick's teasing expression softened into something approaching genuine emotion. "You truly care for her, then. This is not simply duty or your aunt's matchmaking come to fruition." "I love her," Magnus said simply, the words emerging without calculation or hesitation. "I love her intelligence, her integrity, her gentle strength. I love the way she sees the world and the way she makes me see it differently. I love who I am becoming under her influence, more human, more honest, more alive." "Then marry her without further delay," Hartwick advised. "Do not let excessive caution cost you what you have found." But Magnus resisted pressure to accelerate his courtship, despite mounting impatience from family and friends. He had promised Evangeline time to know him truly, to develop genuine affection rather than accepting his suit from gratitude or pragmatism. He would not betray that promise simply because his own feelings had crystallized into certainty. She deserved the opportunity to arrive at her own conclusions without coercion or undue influence. Spring brought the London season, that annual ritual where eligible young people gathered under society's watchful eye to form connections and secure matches. Magnus attended reluctantly, his interest in the usual entertainments minimal now that his heart had settled its affections. Yet propriety demanded his presence at certain events, and he could not entirely avoid the social obligations that came with his position. Evangeline arrived in London for a brief visit with her aunt, Lady Crawford, who maintained a modest townhouse in an unfashionable but respectable neighbourhood. The moment Magnus learned of her presence, he manoeuvred invitations to ensure their paths would cross at various gatherings. He wanted to see her navigating society, to observe how she managed the pressures and pretenses that characterized the season. What he witnessed both impressed and concerned him. Evangeline moved through crowded ballrooms with her characteristic quiet dignity, neither seeking attention nor shrinking from necessary social interactions. She danced when asked with grace that suggested adequate training, conversed with various partners without affected flirtation, and maintained perfect composure even when subjected to the scrutiny of society's most critical matrons. Yet Magnus detected the strain beneath her composed exterior. She found the endless performances exhausting, the superficial conversations draining, the constant evaluation by potential suitors and their families oppressive. During a rare moment of relative privacy at a musicale, he asked how she was managing. "I feel like an object on display," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible above the soprano warbling through an Italian aria. "Evaluated for my utility, assessed for my suitability, judged on criteria that have nothing to do with who I actually am." "Then leave," Magnus suggested impulsively. "Return to Somerset where you can breathe freely." She shook her head, though appreciation for his concern softened her expression. "I cannot abandon my aunt after she has been kind enough to sponsor me. And besides, I wish to see how we manage in this environment, whether what we have built between us can withstand the pressures of society's expectations." Her wisdom humbled him. While he had focused on protecting her from discomfort, she recognized the necessity of testing their connection against real-world challenges. If their relationship could not survive the season's superficiality and scrutiny, what hope did it have for enduring the lifelong pressures of aristocratic marriage? So Magnus adjusted his approach, providing support rather than rescue. He claimed dances on her card when he could, positioned himself at gatherings where his presence might shield her from the worst of society's predators, and arranged for quieter moments amid the chaos where they could talk honestly about what they observed and experienced. During one such conversation, conducted in a relatively secluded corner of a crowded ballroom, while couples whirled past in an energetic country dance, Evangeline shared an observation that revealed how carefully she had been studying him. "You are different here than in Somerset," she noted, watching him with those thoughtful hazel eyes that never missed significant details. "More guarded, more formal, as though you wear a mask that you can remove only in private." Magnus considered denying the assessment, but recognized the futility of deception with someone who saw him so clearly. "Society demands certain performances from those in my position. I learned early to present an acceptable facade." "But which version is real?" Evangeline pressed gently. "The reserved duke who maintains careful distance from everyone, or the man who writes me letters full of honest feeling?" "Both," Magnus admitted, "and neither. I am learning that identity is not fixed but contextual, that we contain multitudes and reveal different aspects depending on circumstances and companions. The question is not which version is real, but which version I wish to cultivate and emphasize." "And which do you wish to cultivate?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "The one who can be honest with you," Magnus replied simply. "The one who allows himself to feel and express emotions rather than suppressing everything beneath layers of careful control. The one who understands that vulnerability represents strength rather than weakness." Evangeline smiled, and in that smile, Magnus saw acceptance, encouragement, and something that might have been the beginning of love. "Then cultivate that version," she urged. "Even here, even surrounded by people who expect you to conform to their narrow definitions of appropriate ducal behavior. because that is the man I wish to know more deeply." Her words gave him permission to continue the evolution she had sparked. With her as his guide and motivation, Magnus began allowing more of his authentic self to emerge even in settings that had previously demanded rigid conformity. He spoke more openly about interests that extended beyond politics and business, shared observations that revealed humor rather than just gravitas, and permitted himself to appear human rather than merely powerful. The transformation did not go unnoticed. His aunt remarked with satisfaction that he seemed more alive than she had seen him in years. Friends who had known him since childhood commented that he had recovered something they thought permanently lost. Even acquaintances who knew him only through formal social interactions detected a shift, though they could not precisely identify what had changed. What had changed, of course, was that Magnus had fallen completely and irrevocably in love. The careful courtship he had begun with honorable intentions had evolved into genuine passion, the kind that poets wrote about and which he had once dismissed as fictional exaggeration. He wanted Evangeline not just as a suitable wife, but as his essential partner, the person without whom his life felt incomplete. Yet he still had not proposed, had not asked the question that hovered constantly in his thoughts. Partly this restraint came from his commitment to giving Evangeline adequate time to develop her own feelings. But increasingly, he recognized that hesitation stemmed from fear, that she might not reciprocate his emotions fully, that she might accept him from gratitude rather than genuine love, that he might inadvertently pressure her into a decision she would later regret. Lady Crawford, Evangeline's aunt, finally addressed his prolonged courtship during an afternoon call at her townhouse. After Evangeline excused herself to fetch some watercolors she had promised to show him, Lady Crawford fixed Magnus with a surprisingly direct gaze. "Your Grace, forgive my bluntness, but what exactly are your intentions toward my niece?" Magnus met her eyes steadily. "I intend to marry her, provided she will have me." "Then why have you not asked?" Lady Crawford demanded. "You have been courting her for months now. You clearly care for her. What prevents you from declaring yourself properly?" "Fear," Magnus admitted with the honesty that Evangeline had taught him to value. "Fear that she does not love me as I love her, that she might accept my proposal out of duty or gratitude rather than genuine feeling." Lady Crawford's stern expression softened slightly. "You really do love her then, not just her suitability or the convenience she might represent?" "I love everything about her," Magnus said with quiet intensity. "Her intelligence, her integrity, her capacity for finding beauty in ordinary moments. I love the way she challenges me to be better while accepting who I am. I love her more than I knew it was possible to love another person." "And you worry she does not return such feelings?" "I worry that I have not earned them yet," Magnus clarified, "that I have not sufficiently proven myself worthy of her trust and affection." Lady Crawford sighed, the sound mixing exasperation with understanding. "Your Grace, you have spent months demonstrating your worthiness through consistent attention, honest communication, and genuine regard for her happiness. If you require absolute certainty before proposing, you will wait forever, for love always contains risk." Before Magnus could respond, Evangeline returned with her watercolors, unknowingly interrupting a conversation that had brought him uncomfortably close to revelations he was not yet ready to voice. He admired her paintings, delicate landscapes that captured the quiet beauty of Somerset's countryside, and listened as she explained the techniques she employed and challenges she encountered. Through it all, he watched her animated face and thought about Lady Crawford's words regarding risk and certainty. That evening, Magnus walked through London's streets alone, wrestling with his persistent hesitation. He had never been a coward in matters of business or politics, never shied from difficult decisions when circumstances demanded action. Yet here, in the arena that mattered most profoundly, he found himself paralyzed by the possibility of rejection or, worse, acceptance offered from reasons other than authentic love. His meandering path eventually brought him to Somerset House, where he stood gazing at the moonlit Thames while couples strolled past arm in arm. The moon hung full and luminous above the city, reminding him of that night when he first heard Evangeline's whispered wish for genuine love in marriage. He had promised her, and himself, that he would offer exactly what she requested. But offering required asking, and asking required courage he had not yet fully summoned. "Your Grace?" The familiar voice startled him from his reverie. He turned to find Evangeline herself approaching, accompanied by her aunt and a maid at a properly chaperoned distance. "Miss Pemberton, I did not expect to encounter you here." "Nor I you," she replied, though pleasure at the unexpected meeting illuminated her features. "We were returning from a dinner engagement and decided to walk along the river despite the late hour." They fell into step together, their chaperones trailing behind as propriety demanded. For several minutes they walked in comfortable silence, watching moonlight dance across the Thames's dark waters. Finally, Evangeline spoke, her voice soft but deliberate. "I have been wanting to ask you something, but I feared the question might seem too forward." "You can ask me anything," Magnus assured her. "I thought we had established that honesty between us transcends concerns about propriety." She glanced at him uncertainly, then seemed to gather her courage. "Why have you not proposed?" The directness of her question caught him off guard, despite the honesty he had just encouraged. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully, while struggling to formulate a response that conveyed truth, without revealing the depths of vulnerability such truth entailed. "Because I want to be certain you would accept me for the right reasons," he finally said. "Because I need to know that if you agree to marry me, it will be from genuine affection rather than gratitude or social pressure." "And you doubt my affection?" Evangeline asked quietly. "I doubt my worthiness of it," Magnus admitted. "You asked the moon for someone who would love you authentically, completely. I have tried to offer such love, but how can I know if I have succeeded? How can I be certain that what I feel and what I provide matches what you hope to find?" Evangeline stared at him for a long moment, emotions flickering across her expressive face faster than he could identify them. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with feeling barely contained. "You ask how you can know if you have offered what I wished for." She shook her head slowly, wonder and exasperation mixing in her expression. "Magnus, you have given me everything I dared hope for, and more than I imagined possible. You have courted me with patience and respect, revealing yourself honestly rather than performing an idealized version. You have written me letters that make me cry from their beauty and laugh from their wit. You have made me feel valued not for what I represent, but for who I am." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, though she made no move to wipe them away. "I love you. I have loved you for months, though I feared saying so lest it pressure you toward obligations you did not genuinely desire. I love you so completely that I can barely remember who I was before you entered my life. And yes, if you ask me to marry you, I will accept, not from duty or gratitude, but because I cannot imagine my future without you in it." The world seemed to stop, all sound and motion fading, except for Evangeline's tear-streaked face and the words she had just spoken. Magnus felt his own eyes burning with unaccustomed moisture as the magnitude of her confession penetrated his careful defenses. "How you love me," he repeated, needing to hear the words again to confirm they were real rather than wishful projection. "Desperately," Evangeline confirmed with a watery laugh. "Completely, with everything I am and everything I hope to become." Something broke loose within Magnus then, some final barrier between fear and full feeling, dissolving under the weight of her declaration. He reached for her hands, propriety forgotten as he held them tightly in his own. "Evangeline Pemberton," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you allow me to spend my life offering you the love you deserve? Will you take this imperfect man, who loves you beyond reason or logic, and help him become someone worthy of the gift you represent?" "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, absolutely yes." Lady Crawford, who had been observing from a discreet distance, chose that moment to approach with a knowing smile. "I take it congratulations are in order?" "They are," Magnus confirmed, unable to suppress the grin that transformed his usually serious features. "Miss Pemberton has agreed to marry me, though I cannot fathom what I did to deserve such fortune." "You offered her honesty when the world encourages deception," Lady Crawford replied. "You valued her for herself when others sought to value her utility. You gave her the authentic love she always deserved, but thought she might never find. That, Your Grace, is precisely what you did to deserve her." The engagement announcement caused significant stir among society, though for different reasons than Magnos had anticipated. Some expressed surprise that he had finally settled on a bride after years of avoiding matrimony. Others wondered at his choice, questioning why a duke with his wealth and position would select someone as unremarkable as Evangeline Pemberton when more celebrated beauties had made themselves available. Magnos ignored the speculation and criticism, focused entirely on the woman who would become his duchess. They spent the remaining weeks before their wedding in a haze of happiness that felt almost surreal after so many years of emotional isolation. He took her to meet his mother, the Dowager Duchess, who immediately embraced Evangeline with genuine warmth after years of despairing that her son would ever marry. "You have given me back, my son," the Dowager Duchess told Evangeline during a private conversation. "He had become so remote, so closed off from feeling. But you have awakened something in him that I feared permanently lost." Evangeline flushed at the praise, but responded with characteristic honesty. "He awakened something in me as well, the courage to believe that my hopes were not foolish fantasies, but reasonable desires worthy of fulfillment." The wedding took place in early summer at the family chapel on the Ashford estate, a modest affair by ducal standards, but perfect in its intimate sincerity. Evangeline wore a gown of ivory silk that her mother had worn years before, altered to fit her slender frame. No jewels adorned her except for the simple pearl necklace that had belonged to Magnos's grandmother, a family heirloom he had presented to her the evening before, with words about how its understated elegance reminded him of her. As Magnos watched Evangeline walk toward him down the chapel aisle, sunlight streaming through stained glass to paint her in colors of amber and rose, he felt his breath catch with the overwhelming reality of this moment. This woman, who had whispered her deepest wish to an indifferent moon, who had dared to demand authentic love in a world that settled for convenient arrangements, had chosen him. Not his title, not his wealth, not the security he could provide, but him, the man he was becoming with her help and encouragement. The ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity, each vow spoken with deliberate care and profound meaning. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Magnos kissed his bride with a tenderness that conveyed promises words could not adequately express. He would spend his life earning her trust, nurturing her happiness, and offering the love she had believed might remain forever beyond reach. The wedding breakfast that followed brought together the small gathering of family and close friends who had witnessed their union. Magnos's mother wept openly, overcome by joy at seeing her son finally claim the happiness she had feared he would never pursue. Baron Pemberton, moved beyond his usual jovial composure, embraced his new son-in-law with genuine affection and gratitude. Even the formidable Dowager Countess, Magnos's aunt, admitted that her matchmaking scheme had exceeded her wildest hopes. "I merely brought you together," she told them during a private moment. "What you built from that introduction was entirely your own doing. Your courage, your honesty, your willingness to risk vulnerability for the possibility of genuine connection." As evening descended and guests departed, Magnos and Evangeline finally found themselves alone in the ducal chambers that would become their shared sanctuary. The intimacy of the moment felt both natural and momentous, the culmination of months of patient courtship and the beginning of their lifelong partnership. "Are you nervous?" Magnos asked gently, noting the slight tremor in Evangeline's hands as she removed her veil. "Terrified," she admitted, with the honesty that had first captivated him, "but also certain that this is exactly where I belong." He crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his and marveling at the ring now adorning her finger, the physical symbol of promises made and accepted. "We proceed at whatever pace feels comfortable," he assured her. "Tonight, tomorrow, all our tomorrows, we have time to learn each other in every way." The tenderness in his voice, the genuine care underlying his words, dissolved Evangeline's anxiety into something warmer and more welcoming. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong lines of jaw and cheekbone as though memorizing features she would spend a lifetime knowing. "I love you," she whispered. "I never tire of saying it, and I hope you never tire of hearing it." "Never," Magnos promised, gathering her close. "Those words are sustenance to me, proof that impossible dreams sometimes materialize against all expectation." Their wedding night unfolded with the same patient care that had characterized their courtship. Moments of awkwardness transformed by laughter, uncertainty overcome through communication, and gradually building passion that honored both desire and tenderness. They discovered each other slowly, learning the language of touch and response, creating intimacy that transcended physical union to encompass emotional and spiritual connection. In the quiet hours before dawn, lying entwined in contentment, Evangeline spoke the thought that had been forming throughout the night. "Do you remember what you said when you first told me you had overheard my wish to the moon?" "I remember every word of every significant conversation we have shared," Magnos replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns across her bare shoulder. "You said you wanted to become the man I had described, someone who would love me authentically, who would choose me for myself rather than convenience." She propped herself on one elbow to look at him directly. "But Magnos, you were already that man. You simply had not yet recognized it within yourself." He considered her words, understanding the truth they contained. His transformation had not been about becoming someone entirely new, but rather about rediscovering aspects of himself that years of careful control had suppressed. Evangeline had not changed his fundamental nature, but had given him permission to embrace the full spectrum of his humanity. The capacity for feeling deeply, loving without reservation, and finding joy in emotional connection rather than treating it as weakness. "You saw potential in me that I had abandoned," he acknowledged. "You believed I could offer you authentic love when I had convinced myself such capacity no longer existed within me." "We awakened each other," Evangeline corrected gently. "You gave me courage to maintain faith in my desires, despite the world insisting they were unrealistic. And I gave you permission to feel again, to risk vulnerability for the possibility of genuine happiness." The summer weeks that followed their wedding passed in blissful discovery as they settled into married life. Magnos brought Evangeline to his primary estate in Hertfordshire, where she immediately charmed the household staff with her unpretentious manner and genuine interest in their well-being. She transformed rooms that had remained cold and formal under his bachelor occupancy, introducing warmth through thoughtful touches that reflected her personality while respecting the home's aristocratic heritage. They established routines that balanced social obligations with private time, creating space for the intimacy that had become essential to both their happiness. Mornings often found them riding together through estate lands, Evangeline's growing confidence as a horsewoman matching Magnos's own skill. Afternoons they spent in companionable productivity, he attending to correspondence and estate business while she painted or read nearby, their silence comfortable rather than awkward. Evenings belonged entirely to each other, conversations ranging from philosophical debates to silly observations that left them both laughing. "I never knew marriage could be like this," Magnos confessed one night as they prepared for bed, helping Evangeline with buttons she could not reach herself. "I observed my parents' marriage before my father died, and they seemed fond enough of each other. But this, what we share, transcends fondness into something I lack adequate vocabulary to describe. Partnership," Evangeline suggested. "Friendship, passion, love that encompasses all those elements and more." "Yes," Magnos agreed, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "All of that, and something indefinable besides, the sense that I am complete in ways I did not recognize I was fragmented before." Their happiness did not exist in isolation from the world's challenges, of course. Estate management presented constant demands on Magnos's time and attention. Evangeline struggled initially with the social expectations that came with her new position, uncertain how to navigate the complex hierarchies and unspoken rules that governed ducal households. They encountered disagreements and misunderstandings that required patient communication to resolve. But each challenge they faced together strengthened rather than threatened their bond. They learned to argue productively, to express frustration without causing lasting harm, to apologize sincerely when wrong, and accept apologies graciously when offered. They discovered that love did not mean constant agreement, but rather the commitment to work through differences while maintaining fundamental respect and affection. As autumn returned, painting the estate in golds and crimsons, Evangeline shared news that would transform their partnership into a family. She was pregnant, carrying the child who would eventually inherit everything Magnos had built. His reaction, a mixture of overwhelming joy, protective fear, and profound gratitude, revealed how thoroughly she had altered his priorities. The title, the estates, the wealth that had once defined his identity now mattered primarily as legacies he would pass to their children, foundations for the family they were creating together. "Are you frightened?" he asked, holding her close while his hand rested protectively over the barely perceptible swell of her abdomen. "Terrified," she admitted, echoing her response on their wedding night, "but also excited, and certain that we will manage whatever comes." Her confidence proved well-founded. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the usual discomforts, and Magnos discovered reserves of tenderness he had not known he possessed. He read medical texts to understand what Evangeline experienced, consulted with physicians to ensure she received optimal care, and rearranged his schedule to remain close as her confinement approached. The birth itself, when it finally arrived during a storm-lashed February night, tested both their courage and their bond. Magnos paced outside the birthing chamber, as tradition demanded, listening to sounds that tore at his heart and made him question every decision that had led to this moment. When the midwife finally emerged to announce he had a healthy daughter, relief flooded through him with such intensity that he nearly collapsed. They named her Luna, after the moon that had witnessed Evangeline's wish and Magnos's inadvertent eavesdropping, the celestial body that had somehow conspired to bring them together. The baby possessed her mother's thoughtful gaze and her father's strong features, a perfect blend of both parents that made them marvel at the miracle of creation. Holding his daughter for the first time while Evangeline watched from her bed with exhausted contentment, Magnos felt the last remnants of his former emotional isolation dissolve completely. This tiny being, so fragile and dependent, represented the future in its purest form. All the love, all the hope, all the possibilities that he and Evangeline would nurture together. "She is perfect," he whispered, tears streaming freely down his face without shame or attempt at concealment. "She is ours," Evangeline replied, her voice thick with emotion. "The first of many blessings our love will create." As spring transformed winter's barrenness into new growth, Magnos reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment of complete happiness. Barely 18 months had passed since that October night, when he overheard a young woman's whispered wish to the moon. In that brief span, he had been transformed from an emotionally remote duke, who viewed marriage as obligation, into a devoted husband and father, who understood that love represented life's greatest privilege and responsibility. The man he had been would not have recognized or approved of who he had become, someone who expressed feelings openly, who prioritized emotional connection over social expectations, who found profound joy in domestic intimacy rather than viewing it as distraction from more important matters. Yet this transformation represented not weakness, but the truest strength, the courage to embrace vulnerability, to risk rejection for the possibility of genuine connection, to allow another person complete access to the deepest chambers of his guarded heart. Part 2. Continued. The wedding took place in early summer at the family chapel on the Ashford estate, a modest affair by ducal standards, but perfect in its intimate sincerity. Evangeline wore a gown of ivory silk that her mother had worn years before, altered to fit her slender frame. No jewels adorned her, except for the simple pearl necklace that had belonged to Magnos's grandmother, a family heirloom he had presented to her the evening before, with words about how its understated elegance reminded him of her. As Magnos watched Evangeline walk toward him down the chapel aisle, sunlight streaming through stained glass to paint her in colors of amber and rose, he felt his breath catch with the overwhelming reality of this moment. This woman, who had whispered her deepest wish to an indifferent moon, who had dared to demand authentic love in a world that settled for convenient arrangements, had chosen him. Not his title, not his wealth, not the security he could provide, but him, the man he was becoming with her help and encouragement. The ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity, each vow spoken with deliberate care and profound meaning. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Magnus kissed his bride with a tenderness that conveyed promises words could not adequately express. He would spend his life earning her trust, nurturing her happiness, and offering the love she had believed might remain forever beyond reach. The wedding breakfast that followed brought together the small gathering of family and close friends who had witnessed their union. Magnus's mother wept openly, overcome by joy at seeing her son finally claim the happiness she had feared he would never pursue. Baron Pemberton, moved beyond his usual jovial composure, embraced his new son-in-law with genuine affection and gratitude. Even the formidable Dowager Countess, Magnus's aunt, admitted that her matchmaking scheme had exceeded her wildest hopes. "I merely brought you together," she told them during a private moment. "What you built from that introduction was entirely your own doing. Your courage, your honesty, your willingness to risk vulnerability for the possibility of genuine connection." As evening descended and guests departed, Magnus and Evangeline finally found themselves alone in the ducal chambers that would become their shared sanctuary. The intimacy of the moment felt both natural and momentous, the culmination of months of patient courtship and the beginning of their lifelong partnership. "Are you nervous?" Magnus asked gently, noting the slight tremor in Evangeline's hands as she removed her veil. "Terrified," she admitted with the honesty that had first captivated him, "but also certain that this is exactly where I belong." He crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his and marveling at the ring now adorning her finger, the physical symbol of promises made and accepted. "We proceed at whatever pace feels comfortable," he assured her. "Tonight, tomorrow, all our tomorrows, we have time to learn each other in every way." The tenderness in his voice, the genuine care underlying his words, dissolved Evangeline's anxiety into something warmer and more welcoming. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong lines of jaw and cheekbone, as though memorizing features she would spend a lifetime knowing. "I love you," she whispered. "I never tire of saying it, and I hope you never tire of hearing it." "Never," Magnus promised, gathering her close. "Those words are sustenance to me, proof that impossible dreams sometimes materialize against all expectation." Their wedding night unfolded with the same patient care that had characterized their courtship, moments of awkwardness transformed by laughter, uncertainty overcome through communication, and gradually building passion that honored both desire and tenderness. They discovered each other slowly, learning the language of touch and response, creating intimacy that transcended physical union to encompass emotional and spiritual connection. In the quiet hours before dawn, lying entwined in contentment, Evangeline spoke the thought that had been forming throughout the night. "Do you remember what you said when you first told me you had overheard my wish to the moon?" "I remember every word of every significant conversation we have shared," Magnus replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns across her bare shoulder. "You said you wanted to become the man I had described, someone who would love me authentically, who would choose me for myself rather than convenience." She propped herself on one elbow to look at him directly. "But Magnus, you were already that man. You simply had not yet recognized it within yourself." He considered her words, understanding the truth they contained. His transformation had not been about becoming someone entirely new, but rather about rediscovering aspects of himself that years of careful control had suppressed. Evangeline had not changed his fundamental nature, but had given him permission to embrace the full spectrum of his humanity, the capacity for feeling deeply, loving without reservation, and finding joy in emotional connection rather than treating it as weakness. "You saw potential in me that I had abandoned," he acknowledged. "You believed I could offer you authentic love when I had convinced myself such capacity no longer existed within me." "We awakened each other," Evangeline corrected gently. "You gave me courage to maintain faith in my desires, despite the world insisting they were unrealistic. And I gave you permission to feel again, to risk vulnerability for the possibility of genuine happiness." The summer weeks that followed their wedding passed in blissful discovery as they settled into married life. Magnus brought Evangeline to his primary estate in Hertfordshire, where she immediately charmed the household staff with her unpretentious manner and genuine interest in their well-being. She transformed rooms that had remained cold and formal under his bachelor occupancy, introducing warmth through thoughtful touches that reflected her personality while respecting the home's aristocratic heritage. They established routines that balanced social obligations with private time, creating space for the intimacy that had become essential to both their happiness. Mornings often found them riding together through estate lands, Evangeline's growing confidence as a horsewoman matching Magnos's own skill. Afternoons they spent in companionable productivity, he attending to correspondence and estate business while she painted or read nearby, their silence comfortable rather than awkward. Evenings belonged entirely to each other, conversations ranging from philosophical debates to silly observations that left them both laughing. "I never knew marriage could be like this," Magnos confessed one night as they prepared for bed, helping Evangeline with buttons she could not reach herself. "I observed my parents' marriage before my father died, and they seemed fond enough of each other. But this, what we share, transcends fondness into something I lack adequate vocabulary to describe. Partnership," Evangeline suggested. "Friendship, passion, love that encompasses all those elements and more." "Yes," Magnos agreed, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "All of that, and something indefinable besides, the sense that I am complete in ways I did not recognize I was fragmented before." Their happiness did not exist in isolation from the world's challenges, of course. Estate management presented constant demands on Magnos's time and attention. Evangeline struggled initially with the social expectations that came with her new position, uncertain how to navigate the complex hierarchies and unspoken rules that governed ducal households. They encountered disagreements and misunderstandings that required patient communication to resolve. But each challenge they faced together strengthened rather than threatened their bond. They learned to argue productively, to express frustration without causing lasting harm, to apologize sincerely when wrong, and accept apologies graciously when offered. They discovered that love did not mean constant agreement, but rather the commitment to work through differences while maintaining fundamental respect and affection. As autumn returned, painting the estate in golds and crimsons, Evangeline shared news that would transform their partnership into a family. She was pregnant, carrying the child who would eventually inherit everything Magnos had built. His reaction, a mixture of overwhelming joy, protective fear, and profound gratitude, revealed how thoroughly she had altered his priorities. The title, the estates, the wealth that had once defined his identity now mattered primarily as legacies he would pass to their children, foundations for the family they were creating together. "Are you frightened?" he asked, holding her close while his hand rested protectively over the barely perceptible swell of her abdomen. "Terrified," she admitted, echoing her response on their wedding night, "but also excited, and certain that we will manage whatever comes." Her confidence proved well-founded. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the usual discomforts, and Magnos discovered reserves of tenderness he had not known he possessed. He read medical texts to understand what Evangeline experienced, consulted with physicians to ensure she received optimal care, and rearranged his schedule to remain close as her confinement approached. The birth itself, when it finally arrived during a storm-lashed February night, tested both their courage and their bond. Magnos paced outside the birthing chamber, as tradition demanded, listening to sounds that tore at his heart and made him question every decision that had led to this moment. When the midwife finally emerged to announce he had a healthy daughter, relief flooded through him with such intensity that he nearly collapsed. They named her Luna, after the moon that had witnessed Evangeline's wish and Magnos's inadvertent eavesdropping, the celestial body that had somehow conspired to bring them together. The baby possessed her mother's thoughtful gaze and her father's strong features, a perfect blend of both parents that made them marvel at the miracle of creation. Holding his daughter for the first time, while Evangeline watched from her bed with exhausted contentment, Magnos felt the last remnants of his former emotional isolation dissolve completely. This tiny being, so fragile and dependent, represented the future in its purest form, all the love, all the hope, all the possibilities that he and Evangeline would nurture together. "She is perfect," he whispered, tears streaming freely down his face without shame or attempt at concealment. "She is ours," Evangeline replied, her voice thick with emotion. the first of many blessings our love will create. As spring transformed winter's barrenness into new growth, Magnos reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment of complete happiness. Barely 18 months had passed since that October night, when he overheard a young woman's whispered wish to the moon. In that brief span, he had been transformed from an emotionally remote duke, who viewed marriage as obligation, into a devoted husband and father, who understood that love represented life's greatest privilege and responsibility. The man he had been would not have recognized or approved of who he had become, someone who expressed feelings openly, who prioritized emotional connection over social expectations, who found profound joy in domestic intimacy rather than viewing it as distraction from more important matters. Yet this transformation represented not weakness, but the truest strength, the courage to embrace vulnerability, to risk rejection for the possibility of genuine connection, to allow another person complete access to the deepest chambers of his guarded heart. Part 3. The years that followed Luna's birth unfolded with a richness that Magnos had never imagined possible during his bachelor existence. Each season brought new developments, fresh challenges and deepening bonds, as he and Evangeline navigated the complexities of aristocratic life while maintaining the authentic connection that formed their marriage's foundation. Luna proved to be a child of remarkable curiosity and determination, qualities that delighted both parents even when they complicated daily routines. She walked early, talked constantly, and demanded explanations for everything she observed with a persistence that would have exhausted less devoted parents. Magnos spent hours answering her endless questions about everything from why the sky appeared blue to how birds learned to fly, finding in her intellectual hunger a reflection of his own scholarly inclinations. "She will be formidable when she grows up," Evangeline observed one afternoon, watching their daughter interrogate the head gardener about the proper care of roses. "Heaven help any man who tries to court her without genuine substance." "Heaven help us when that time arrives," Magnos countered with mock alarm, though genuine concern colored his humor. "I am not prepared to contemplate my daughter attracting romantic attention." Evangeline laughed, the sound still capable of lifting his spirits even after years of marriage. "You have many years before that becomes a concern. For now, she is simply our inquisitive little girl who finds wonder in everything." Their family expanded when Evangeline delivered a son 2 years after Luna's birth. They named him Edmund, after Magnos's father, and the boy inherited his mother's gentle temperament, along with the family's distinctive dark hair. Where Luna charged through life with fierce determination, Edmund observed with quiet thoughtfulness, processing information before acting rather than diving immediately into new experiences. The contrast between their children fascinated Magnos, highlighting how two people raised by the same parents in identical circumstances could develop such different approaches to existence. He found himself learning from both, Luna teaching him about courage and assertiveness, Edmund about patience and careful consideration. Together, they represented the full spectrum of human potential, and nurturing both their distinct personalities became one of parenthood's greatest challenges and rewards. Estate management grew more complex as Magnos implemented progressive agricultural practices that challenged traditional methods. He consulted with Evangeline on these decisions, valuing her practical wisdom and her ability to perceive human dimensions that pure economics might overlook. Together, they introduced reforms that improved tenant conditions while maintaining estate profitability, a balance that required constant adjustment, but produced results that benefited everyone involved. "You have become an unusually enlightened landlord," Lord Hartwick observed during a visit to discuss potential parliamentary initiatives. "Your tenants actually seem to like you, which is remarkably rare among our class." "They like Evangeline," Magnos corrected. "She insists on knowing them as individuals rather than merely as sources of rent revenue. Her influence has made me recognize my responsibilities extend beyond financial obligations." Hartwick studied his old friend with an expression mixing amusement and respect. "Marriage has civilized you, Magnos. Who would have predicted that the cold pragmatist I knew at university would transform into a devoted family man who quotes his wife's wisdom?" "Who indeed?" Magnos agreed with a self-deprecating smile. "Certainly not me during those years when I convinced myself emotional distance represented sophistication rather than cowardice." The conversation reminded him how dramatically his perspective had shifted since meeting Evangeline. The ambitions that had once driven him, accumulating wealth, expanding political influence, maintaining social position, now served primarily as means to secure his family's well-being, rather than as ends in themselves. He still fulfilled his aristocratic duties conscientiously, but they no longer defined his identity or consumed his emotional energy. What mattered most existed within the walls of his home. Evangeline's presence that made every space feel welcoming, Luna's exuberant chatter during family dinners, Edmund's quiet contentment when reading stories before bed, the profound sense of belonging that came from being loved for his essential self rather than his title or accomplishments. This shift did not go unnoticed among his peers. Some viewed his domestic focus as admirable, evidence of maturity and proper priorities. Others whispered that he had become soft, dominated by his wife, insufficiently attentive to the power games that characterized aristocratic society. Magnos discovered that their opinions troubled him remarkably little. He had spent too many years performing for others' approval to waste his remaining time on Earth, concerned about judgments from people whose values he no longer shared. "Does it bother you when they criticize your choices?" Evangeline asked after one particularly tedious social event, where several matrons had made pointed comments about his unusual devotion to family life. "Not remotely," Magnos assured her as they prepared for bed, both relieved to escape the evening's superficiality. "Their criticism merely confirms that I have finally discovered what truly matters, and they have not." She smiled, though concern lingered in her expression. "I sometimes worry that marrying me cost you status or influence among your peers, that you sacrificed opportunities by choosing someone like me rather than a more politically advantageous match." Magnos caught her hands, drawing her close to ensure she could see the absolute sincerity in his eyes. "Evangeline, you gave me life. Everything before meeting you was merely existence, going through motions, fulfilling obligations, maintaining appearances. You taught me that authentic happiness comes from genuine connection rather than social position. That represents a gift beyond any political advantage or aristocratic alliance." "I gave you nothing you did not already possess," she protested gently. "I simply helped you recognize what had always existed within you." "Then you gave me self-knowledge," Magnos countered, "the courage to embrace my full humanity rather than performing a limited version deemed acceptable by society. That alone justifies any sacrifice, real or imagined." Their children grew rapidly, as children inevitably do, transforming from infants requiring constant care into young people with distinct personalities and emerging interests. Luna developed a passion for horses that rivaled her father's own, spending hours in the stables learning everything she could about breeding, training, and care. Edmund discovered music, his natural ear and patient temperament, making him an exceptionally gifted pianist by age 8. Magnos and Evangeline encouraged both pursuits while ensuring their children understood the responsibilities that accompanied aristocratic privilege. They took Luna and Edmund to visit tenant families, exposing them to lives very different from their own sheltered existence. They involved them in charitable work, teaching through example that wealth created obligations to those less fortunate. They discussed complex issues at the dinner table, encouraging questions and debates that developed critical thinking. "You are raising revolutionaries," the Dowager Duchess observed, with a mixture of pride and concern after Luna challenged a visiting peer's dismissive comments about agricultural laborers. "That child has no concept of appropriate deference to her social superiors." "She has perfect understanding of appropriate deference," Magnos corrected mildly. "She simply believes respect must be earned through character and conduct, rather than automatically granted based on birth or title." His mother sighed, though affection softened her exasperation. "You and Evangeline are preparing them for a world that does not yet exist, one where lineage matters less than merit, where women speak their minds freely, where class distinctions blur into irrelevance." "Perhaps," Magnos acknowledged, "or perhaps we are preparing them to help create that world. Either way, I would rather they possess integrity and compassion than perfect mastery of obsolete social codes." This philosophy guided all their parenting decisions, sometimes placing them at odds with conventional aristocratic child-rearing practices. They allowed their children unusual freedom to explore interests and ask questions. They answered even difficult inquiries honestly, rather than deflecting with platitudes. They treated Luna and Edmund as developing individuals deserving respect, rather than as possessions to be molded according to parental preferences. The approach yielded remarkable results. Both children developed into confident, thoughtful young people who possessed their parents' best qualities while forging their own distinct identities. Luna's fierce determination and Edmund's gentle wisdom represented different expressions of the authentic selfhood that Magnus and Evangeline had fought to preserve in their own lives. As Luna approached her 10th birthday, she came to Magnus one evening with a question that revealed how carefully she observed the world around her. They sat together in his study, the space where he conducted estate business, but which had become a favorite retreat for their conversations. "Father, why did you choose to marry Mother?" Luna asked with characteristic directness. Magnus set aside the documents he had been reviewing, recognizing that this conversation deserved his complete attention. "What prompts that question?" "I overheard Lady Pembroke telling Mother that you could have married anyone. The dukes usually choose wives based on political advantages or enormous dowries, but Mother's family is not particularly wealthy or influential. So why did you choose her?" The question's complexity impressed him, evidence of Luna's developing social awareness. He considered how to answer honestly, while keeping the explanation appropriate for a child's understanding. "I chose your mother because she taught me to value authentic feeling over social advantage," he said carefully. "Because she showed me that true happiness comes from genuine connection rather than strategic alliances. Because she made me want to be better than I was, not more powerful or wealthy, but more honest, more human, more capable of real love." Luna absorbed this answer with serious concentration. "So you married her for love rather than convenience?" "Exactly. But that is unusual among your class, is it not? Most aristocratic marriages are arranged based on family interests rather than personal preference." "Sadly true," Magnus acknowledged. "Many of my peers marry for practical reasons and hope affection might develop afterward. Some find companionship despite loveless beginnings. Others endure unhappy unions because they prioritized everything except mutual regard and compatibility." "That seems terribly sad," Luna observed, with the moral clarity of youth. "Spending your entire life with someone you do not truly love." "It is sad," Magnus agreed, "which is why your mother and I have chosen a different path, and why we hope you and Edmund will do the same when your time comes." Luna nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with characteristic seriousness. Then she asked the question that had probably motivated this entire conversation. "When I grow up and men want to court me, how will I know which ones truly care about me versus which ones only want my dowry or family connections?" Magnus felt his heart constrict with the protective instinct that fatherhood had awakened. The thought of his daughter navigating the treacherous